Thank you for the invitation to present at this conference on plasma-derived medicines. My name is Nikolaj Siersbaek. I'm a senior economist at Copenhagen Economics, and the title of this presentation is International Vision of Supply and Models. Copenhagen Economics is an economic consultancy company founded in 2000. We have offices in Copenhagen, Stockholm, Helsinki, and Brussels, and currently employ more than 90 people. The content of this presentation is based on a report we did for Takeda that was published back in June last year on the impact of plasma-derived therapies in Europe. The report is available online, so you are more than welcome to give it a read, and do feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments. This presentation is divided into two different sections. The first is on plasma need and supply in Europe, and the second is on different plasma collection models throughout Europe. So first of all, it's important to recognize that patients living with a disease that can be treated with plasma-derived therapy are located all over Europe. This makes availability of and access to plasma-derived therapies a European question. Second of all, the emergence of recombinant alternatives have not left plasma-derived therapies completely redundant. So broadly speaking, there are two different groups. Either there are diseases that can be treated with a plasma-derived therapy as the only option, and alternatively, there are diseases that can be treated with both a plasma-derived therapy and a recombinant alternative. For the first part, those that can only be treated with plasma-derived therapies, plasma is of course an essential raw material to produce this life-changing and life-saving material. However, for the second group where recombinant alternatives do exist, we still see widespread use of plasma-derived therapies throughout Europe. You can see that in the map to the right here, using the share of total use of factor VIII used to treat patients with hemophilia, where both a plasma-derived therapy and a recombinant alternative exist, but still the use of plasma-derived therapies is widespread throughout Europe. Now, from an economic point of view, plasma-derived therapies is an interesting topic due to what has been labeled plasma economics and the importance of last liter products. So in principle, when you start with the first liter of plasma, you can utilize it fully. All products can be produced from this first liter. We illustrate this here using 4 plasma-derived therapies: immunoglobulin, albumin, factor VIII, and C1 inhibitor. However, as more plasma is fractionated, the product with the lowest demand is no longer produced. In this case, we start producing C1 inhibitor. As more plasma is fractionated, one by one, each of these plasma-derived therapies that are no longer in demand will stop being produced. So we will stop producing factor VIII and albumin. So only one product remains in the end, which is the product with the highest demand, which is also labeled the last liter product. It's interesting because it allows us to look into the demand for the last liter product and the derived effects on the demand for plasma as raw material. So in the top here, we can see the total consumption in Europe of IVIG and SCIG, so immunoglobulin, from 2005 to 2017. This has increased significantly from around 20,000 kilograms to around 50,000 kilograms. Even more importantly, or at least as importantly, it is projected to increase by 33% towards 2025. As a consequence, this demand for plasma in Europe has increased a lot and is expected or forecasted to increase a lot going forward as well. From 2005 to 2017, plasma demand in Europe increased from around 11 million liters to around 24.6 million liters, and is expected to increase by 88% towards 2025. Now, importantly, in Europe, the vast majority, so 91% of plasma in Europe, is fractionated by commercial companies. See that to the left here. Equally importantly, we know that commercial companies mostly rely on source plasma donated through apheresis donations rather than recovered plasma donated through whole blood donations. So around 81% of both the commercial plasma process in Europe and the total plasma process in Europe comes from source plasma. However, the amount of plasma donated in Europe is much smaller than the actual amount fractionated. You can see that in the bottom left here. If we look beyond, we can see that North America obtains much more plasma for fractionation, around 7.5 times more. In addition, we can see that the split between source plasma and recovered plasma is vastly different in North America than in Europe, where it's approximately equal. So this has the natural consequence that Europe is not self-sufficient in plasma fractionation. It's been estimated that plasma imports constitute around 38% of the total plasma fractionated in Europe, and this is imported mainly from the US. So some years ago, the total import of plasma from the US was almost 90 million liters. But as the first takeaway, European plasma fractionation is heavily reliant on plasma imports, mainly from the US. Second of all, it's important to notice that these 4 countries, Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, and Hungary, have private plasma collection and account for 24% of the total plasma fractionation in Europe. For comparison, all other countries that have public and NGO collection account for 38%. So, given that there is a higher demand for plasma in Europe than the actual supply of plasma, we now turn to the different reimbursement and compensation practices that can help increase plasma donation rates in Europe. So importantly, only Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, and Hungary provide an actual fixed monetary compensation for donors' inconvenience and loss of earnings through private plasma collections. Other countries provide small compensations as well, but it's most profound in these 4 countries I just mentioned. On the contrary, most countries in Europe provide small tokens of appreciation or time off work, and some provide reimbursement of travel costs. So it seems like this is a pretty widespread use, but first of all, looking into different reimbursement practices in Europe, it's important to recognize that the European Commission and the European Union acknowledges that reimbursing donors for their actual expenses related to the donation is in line with a voluntary and unpaid donation, which is the principle governing plasma donations in Europe. It's also noted that compensation means reparation strictly limited to making good the expenses and inconvenience related to the donation. So, of course, if you have a disincentive to donate because you have to pay for a bus ticket to a plasma donation center yourself, it's important to remove these disincentives to ensure that that's not the actual thing that's preventing donors from donating. However, we see across Europe that reimbursement is not consistently used. For example, only around half of European member states provide reimbursement of travel costs. Similarly, around half provide time off work in the public or private sector. Free physical checkup and free reimbursement of medical costs is only provided in pretty few member states, but some of this may be mitigated by public healthcare systems in many of the European countries. So important to increase the focus on reimbursement of actual expenses for potential donors to ensure that that's not an actual disincentive to donate. The second aspect, if we want to increase donation rates even further, we look into the NÜFL Council on Bioethics' intervention letter. So, like I just mentioned, the European Commission has the governing principle of voluntary and unpaid donations of plasma in Europe. We thus need to ensure that any interventions are altruistically focused and not provide a financial gain or advantage due to the donation. If we start from the bottom, information about the need for donation of bodily material is one clear aspect that's altruistically focused and does not prone anyone to donate who was not already considering doing so in the first place. Similarly, recognition of and gratitude for altruistic donations, for example, through small tokens of appreciations, are other means of increasing donation rates that are altruistically focused. If we look into steps 3 and 4, we move on to intervention that seeks to remove barriers and disincentives to donate and provide an extra prompt of encouragement for those already disposed to donate for altruistic reasons. This is important to notice that even though you remove barrier by providing some sort of transfer to individuals, that does not necessarily constitute an intervention that's not non-altruistically focused. On the other hand, if an invention offers associated benefits in kind to encourage those who would not otherwise have contemplated donating to doing so, then that's non-altruistically focused. Similarly, if you get in financial incentives so that you are in a better position afterwards, that's also non-altruistically focused. So this basically leaves us to this broad overview of adding another dimension of a framework for different initiatives. On the left-hand side, we have the focus, if it's altruistically focused and thus in line with voluntary and unpaid donations. And in the bottom, we have non-altruistic focused initiatives that actually creates incentives and ensures that donors who may not have contemplating donating would actually do it in the first place. So it's important to distinguish between the terminology used here, that a compensation in this setup is a transfer to the donor to compensate an incurred loss that can be either monetary or non-monetary. So this also covers, for example, pain associated with the donation. On the other hand, an incentive is a transfer to the donor that goes beyond the incurred loss and leaves the donor in a better position after the donation compared to before the donation. So one of the altruistically focused initiatives is reimbursement of incurred expenses. This should nature be monetary because reimbursement is monetary expenses incurred by the potential donor. However, you can also increase this to monetary compensation that offsets the monetary and non-monetary losses associated by the donor. This could either replace, for example, time off work, but could also offset some of the losses, non-monetary losses associated with a donation, for example, pain associated with the donation. However, if the payment or the transfer is sufficiently high, then it will constitute an actual payment that makes the donor better off after the donation and thus be non-altruistically focused. So these types of monetary compensation or payments are theoretically different but difficult to separate in practice. At the same time, it's possible to provide non-monetary compensation and rewards, but the same applies. If the reward is big enough, then it constitutes a non-altruistically focused intervention. So this is a difficult topic to settle on. What we do know is that Europe is heavily reliant on plasma imports, mainly from the US, because the plasma collection in Europe for fractionation is not sufficiently high. Second of all, we know that the 4 European countries that have private plasma collection and provide a monetary compensation of to offset the disincentives associated with donating have much higher donation rates than all other countries in Europe. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and do feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments.